Well, welcome everybody. This is today's webinar hosted by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in North America and sponsored by AAR. We're delighted to have such a large turnout for today's webinar. This is the first in our Urban Futures webinar series. And today we're going to be looking at urban logistics in a pandemic. Its implications, challenges, and the solutions that we have seen. My name is Andrew Young. I'm chairman of the US chapter of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, which I'll call CILT from now on, here in North America. For those of you not aware of CILT, we are a professional body for everyone who works in the supply chain and logistics, as well as the transport planning and passenger transport industries. We have 34,000 members over 30 countries around the world, and our mission is to develop the art and science of logistics and transport through research, education, networking, and sharing of ideas. We support the career development of our members with relevant industry-based training and by awarding CILT certifications, which are recognized throughout the world. I am very pleased today to introduce our four speakers. All are established experts in their field. So Rosanna Collars is a senior planner at AAR, and she leads the freight planning and logistics practice at AAR New York. Rosanna's project portfolio spans policy guidance on urban freight movement, city logistics strategies for neighborhoods and communities, and site planning and operations for commercial, industrial properties and hubs. Denise Mendez is Director of Freight Mobility at New York City's Department of Transportation. Denise is a civil engineering professional with experience implementing large-scale transportation planning and performance systems across the greater New York City area. In her role at the DOT, she spearheads policies, regulations, and initiatives to ensure the safe, equitable, and efficient, sustainable movement of goods in New York City's complex urban freight landscape. Margaret Kidd is the Supply Chain and Logistics Technology Program Director at the University of Houston, a Carnegie Foundation Tier 1 public university. Margaret is a recognized supply chain and logistics subject matter expert at the University of Houston, but also across the business community in Southern Texas. She has been instrumental in increasing the visibility of the supply chain and logistics profession. I'm pleased to say that both the bachelor's and the master's supply chain programs at the University of Houston are accredited for CILT membership. And Dr. Bruce Race is the director at the University of Houston's Caesar Center and a director at the Gerald D. Hines College of Architecture and Design. Bruce is one of few architecture and urban planning professionals in the country who has been elected as a fellow to both the American Institute of Architects and the Institute of Certified Planners. He's also principal and founder of Race Studio, where he's responsible for all aspects of project planning, design, and delivery. And since 1994, he's received 33 design and planning awards, including 9 national awards. So welcome to all of our esteemed speakers. Before I hand over to them to actually start this webinar and the presentations, I'd just like to cover some brief housekeeping items. First of all, if you get disconnected from this webinar for any reason, please just click on the link again. You should be able to rejoin and get back in. I'd like everybody to please remain on mute with the videos switched off throughout the webinar. We do encourage any questions you may have, and I'm sure the topic will generate some interest and some questions. So please utilize the Zoom chat feature. We'll start to collate those and we'll cover those in a Q&A panel session towards the end of today's webinar. I'd also like to add that Today's webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for viewing at CILTNA's website and also on our YouTube channel. And everybody who's attended and registered will get an email with details on accessing the recording after the event. So, without further ado, I'll now hand over to Rosanna, who will start with an introduction to the urban futures concept. This is what has inspired this series of webinars. Rosanna will then move on to her presentation on the logistics impacts and design challenges resulting from the pandemic that she's experienced in New York City.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. I am navigating to the next slide and it's not moving. So just trying to fix this here. Wafa, should we redo the control for a moment?
It's moving for me. I see that it is moving. Yeah. So.
Okay, so now we're a few ahead. I apologize. Let me go back. I think I might have a delay on my end. Wafa, do you mind doing control so that I can then?
Of course.
Just go?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is a bigger delay than we experienced yesterday. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. With having a lot of people, it tends to happen.
Yeah. So if we go back just 2 more.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, are we there?
Yep.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm still not seeing the screen. There we go. The Urban Futures webinar series. Thank you, Wafa. As we all know, the worldwide nature of the COVID-19 pandemic has no parallel in recent history and few precedents guiding our response. Our Urban Future webinar series evaluates current urban conditions and opportunities as practitioners in the built environment collaborate towards a new paradigm for urban mobility in cities. You might have to let me know when it's next. I'm on a delay.
Next.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
While we feel the disruption of the pandemic and actively work to respond to present challenges, we also recognize the opportunity to make informed choices in moving forward and collectively evolve our thinking around cities and how we engage within our communities. Next slide. Mm-hmm. We need responses and tactics that not only address the new norm, but can be deployed across a series of scales. Looking thoughtfully at these layers of critical components and systems allows us to be strategic while influencing holistic and scalable change in how our urban spaces operate and how we experience them. Next. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Innovation is key, but even more important is sharing our insights with one another, which is the spirit of today's webinar as well as the series as well. The image on the slide features a popular destination in downtown Princeton, which has transformed from a 2-way street with 2 lanes of parking to a pedestrianized street that supports the local businesses and restaurants. As a logistics consultant, I wanted to capture the way in which both amenities and operations have been balanced, but as a local, I want to say that this is a place I've returned to many times since evolution. I've spent a lot of time there this summer, and I look forward to seeing how it continues to evolve in the long term. Mm-hmm. I'm going to spend just a few moments introducing AAR, host of today's webinar and the Urban Future series. And then the slide with it. Globe. AAR is an independent planning, design, and engineering firm working across every aspect of the built environment. We focus on urban mobility problems in cities across the world, and we try to find new solutions to problems society faces. We do that because we are mission-driven, and as sustainable, urban, resilient places are core to our mission, we are located in central cities. As a firm, we have global reach and are fully networked amongst all our offices, and we apply multidisciplinary thinking in all the projects that we undertake, which is why we think about logistics as an integral part of urban mobility. Next slide. Mm-hmm. Thank you. ARIP's fully inclusive trust ownership means that there are no shareholders or external investors, allowing our firm to determine priorities and business direction fully independently. In turn, we advise our clients in honest and transparent ways, and we ensure that their interest always comes first. As shown here, we have self-investment to research and innovate, and a few examples of our work are shown on the slide. City Alive, for example, is a series of global research and events that take a human-centered approach to how we should design and manage cities in the future. I will also take a moment to highlight the Smart Truck Management Plan, a project that we worked on for New York City DOT's Office of Freight Mobility. The plan is titled Delivering New York and provides a blueprint for safe, efficient, equitable, and sustainable urban goods movement, and I'm pleased to say will be available to the public in the near term. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
At AAR New York, I lead the freight planning and logistics practice, and similar to the makeup of the firm, we are a team of planners, engineers, consultants, designers, and technical experts that work across multiple scales. We advise our clients as they plan and operate in congested and complex urban environments, and we deliver plans, policies, and designs that ensure positive financial, social, and sustainable outcomes. Next.
Mm-hmm.
So my aim today is to share our insights and experiences in urban operations, notably the connection between logistics and the public realm. Next.
Mm-hmm.
It's no secret that urban congestion is widely acknowledged as a cost of doing business. However, in addition to congestion, shippers, receivers, and building owners and operators must contend with other realities as well. This includes narrow streets and tight geometric conditions, old building infrastructure and undersized loading docks, and simply a lack of space to meet all the competing needs at the curb and the streets. Slide.
Mm-hmm.
While there is a pride in New York for those who make it work in these conditions, and almost a shared novelty for the residents, businesses, and tourists who experience it firsthand, the reality is that these conditions create conflicts and negative externalities. I'm going to show a quick example of what happens when all the street needs collide in one place. Sorry, next slide. I'm going to show a quick example of what happens, highlighting in particular the journey of the cyclist. You can press play.
Press.
As it has been, sorry?
They've seen, yeah, I played it.
Okay, cool. So as you have seen, I apologize for my delay. The cyclist had to divert out of the cycle path, and delivery worker was unloading on street and exposed to moving traffic. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Quite simply, urban logistics plays a fundamental role in the quality of the public realm. We recognize, whether at the building or neighborhood scale, when coordinated and active management of logistics activities and supply chains are missing, there are significant negative impacts to all stakeholders and the broader community. Conversely, efficient operations and a holistic approach to freight mobility and access not only mean lower costs for businesses and good community relations, but also allows our clients, whether they be developers, building owners, or bids, to actively align themselves with the city's long-term emissions and carbon goals. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
The last few months have shown us a few things. Firstly, e-commerce during the pandemic has induced more vehicle trips overall, and we are seeing a rise in both delivery vehicles as well as on-demand vehicles. For example, Instacart alone had plans to hire 200,000 employees early this year, which is effectively deploying nearly a fleet of 200,000. In addition to the increase of vehicles on our streets, we need our streets as outdoor spaces more than ever before. These streets and sidewalks are now critical to supporting local businesses, especially the heavily hit food and beverage industries, as well as hosting physical activity and facilitating access to green space. With all of these factors combined, there's also a real concern about the additional health risks due to the increasing exposure to environmental pollutants. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Along with new challenges, there are practical concerns at the building scale. Okay, just making sure that we're looking at the building. Yep, okay. While New Yorkers have a talent for making the most of limited spaces, as we see on the screen, there is a concern that if we limit capacity within these loading docks for safety reasons, that the outplaced demand will create additional conflicts at the building and street interface. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
There's also concern about the safety for building staff as well as delivery drivers who've demonstrated beyond a doubt their role as essential workers, creating new questions about operations. How do deliveries get inspected and signed for when we need to minimize person-to-person contact? Should delivery drivers continue to enter buildings and make their final destination several floors up? If not, how does the chain of custody work for various commodities being delivered? Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
While our core approach at these various scales does not deviate far from our approach pre-COVID, it has underscored the importance of integrating logistics within planning and design. This includes developing a strong concept of operations at the building scale, a coordinated approach to deliveries and waste at the neighborhood scale, and holistic planning incorporating logistics as we look to the future of urban campuses and post-COVID economic regeneration in our cities. Next slide. So making it work. I will spend the next few slides highlighting strategies that we consider with our clients as they seek to improve their loading docks and operational continuity, especially in the face of new public health and safety needs. Earlier, we recognized the possible implications of making an even more space-constrained loading dock work. Utilizing technology such as scheduling software, as well as coordination and consistent communication with vendors, will be key to maximizing any reduction in vehicle capacity, as well as minimizing person-to-person contact. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughtful design and planning interventions will improve safety by facilitating distance and ensuring there is clarity of process. For example, new protocols around unloading, access to service elevators, and movement through back-of-house spaces should be reinforced by signage and markings indicating how to navigate the physical space as well as the associated processes now in place. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Opportunities to more efficiently utilize space or reduce delivery trips overall may be done by employing high-density storage solutions, as well as evaluating temporary waste needs due to lower building occupancy. However, big or small, successful implementation of any solution requires an understanding of baseline conditions at the building. This includes recognizing how many trucks arrive on a day-to-day basis and when they are arriving, how many delivery and waste trips are being generated by building use or number of occupants, as well as the service level requirements and needs of a business or businesses occupying the building, especially in dense vertical high-rise buildings as New York. Recognizing the complex web of interdependencies and impacts between different users and protocols, our experience has shown that even deploying a simple solution or new technology requires planning ahead and significant coordination and communication between the building staff as well as the external vendors. Next.
Mm-hmm.
So as cities and towns throughout North America seek to cement the positive changes we've experienced in the public realm, including building upon the Open Streets initiatives in New York City, it's never been more important to incorporate logistics solutions in urban design and mobility planning. To share a few examples of some work that we're doing, understanding both the truck trip and waste trip generation in a neighborhood can help identify where street closures make sense and where other streets need to remain open for freight access, or where underutilized parcels can be designated for consolidated waste and deliveries, or lastly, for where additional infrastructure such as delivery lockers can be installed without compromising amenities or experience. In many cases, we also recommend that our clients work with their constituents to leverage the policies and programs that New York City's Office of Freight Mobility already has in place, and which Denise will talk about shortly. Ultimately, as freight and logistics activities are better acknowledged and integrated into the design and operation of the built environment, these new public realm opportunities can be successfully maintained long-term. And with that said, I'm happy to introduce Denise Mendez, both a client and collaborator I've had the pleasure of working with now for many years. Denise leads a team that day to day are implementing policies and growing programs to make sure New York residents and businesses continue to get the goods they need, especially during a pandemic. Thank you.
Many thanks, Rosanna. As you so aptly laid out the freight considerations for off-street freight infrastructure, I'll be connecting the link to the last mile and pretty much where we see some of the fiercest competition for the public realm, as well as the curb. I'll highlight some programs and initiatives that are currently underway at New York City DOT, and also leave the participants of this webinar with some key takeaways. So New York City is definitely experiencing a changing landscape. Our dense concentration of residents, record job growth, tourism, and businesses is really what makes us so dynamic as a city. It is home to one of the most complex urban transportation networks in the world. And most recently, our streets have been reconfigured to allow for more social distancing, outdoor dining to help with the business recovery, as well as emergency bike lanes and bus lanes to ensure that we were providing alternative options for social distancing while people can still get around, and as well as speeding up bus service. But businesses have also been grappling with the surge of delivery trips, and particularly many more are searching for new ways to conduct contactless deliveries to protect the health and safety of customers, as well as the employees that they serve, and most importantly, to stay above water. But it goes without saying that our job has certainly become more challenging over the past 6 months with the COVID-19 pandemic. Like New York City, as well as other metro regions, the pandemic has brought into focus the inherent need to rethink how freight moves in and around and through our city. And there certainly are some silver linings. So just really giving you an overview for DOT, our mission is to provide safe, efficient, and environmentally responsible movement of people and goods. I want to underscore that aspect. And we certainly want to ensure that we're supporting the economic vitality of our region and the quality of life. And there are certainly ways so that we can continue to link how prioritizing freight and really and making sure that is an important part of the planning efforts can really help you achieve livability. We maintain a significant network, as I mentioned, moving a certain X number of people, as are listed here, 6,000 miles of streets, 12,000 miles of sidewalk, while just close to 800 bridges and tunnels throughout the region, X number of signalized intersections. So it's a huge undertaking, and keeping New York City moving is certainly our priority. So at a glance, 1 in 15 New Yorkers work in freight-dependent industries in New York City, but 90% of the goods that are moved in New York City are moved by truck, and we're expected to see a 68% increase by 2045. Based on our previous recordings and surveys, we saw that 45% of New Yorkers receive a delivery at least once a week to their home. That has been a transformative shift, particularly within these last 6 months, as a lot more folks have been relying on their lifeline of having deliveries to their home, particularly because of the pandemic and folks that have been working from home. 60% of deliveries were made to commercial establishments rather than residential customers prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. But what we saw was that there was a fundamental shift. 80% of deliveries were now being made to residential areas. While we saw a decline in truck trips immediately after the restrictions were put in place, those immediately rebounded right at the end of May, showing that there's been a resiliency, particularly within our freight network, but also that this is an inherent need in an invisible public good that we oftentimes don't think about. So there's also, please mute your phone. There's a need to address freight externalities, particularly as we see this growth. So what are we doing to tackle the surge of residential deliveries within New York City? We have seen significant growth, as I mentioned, we've launched a neighborhood loading zone demonstration program last summer. And that program has been quite popular over the past year. They allow for expeditious pickup of deliveries and drop off of personal vehicles, but they also allow for those quick pickup and drop off by a taxi or a TNCs like Uber and Lyft. To date, we've installed 62 loading zones citywide, and we're currently examining what the next steps for this program can look like. But this is really a fundamental shift in terms of our planning. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, we weren't thinking about loading zones in residential areas, right? So now our mindset and our shift in terms of what freight means to different neighborhoods has certainly changed over the last couple of years, and we're looking at ways to continue to adapt. We're also looking at ways to green our last mile delivery network. We launched our pedal assist cargo bike pilot program in December last year. There are various series of considerations, whether it be the types of goods that are most suitable to be delivered using cargo bikes, whether there are economies of scale in terms of cost efficiency, durability, seasonality, all of those considerations. But the impact for using this type of mode for delivery is usually has a significant impact as it relates to carbon emissions and the cost efficiency for the operators. For our pilot program, cargo bikes can operate, can load, unload, and stage wherever commercial vehicles can park. And this picture here on the right shows where some of this activity is actually happening right in front of Whole Foods Market. One of our partners has Amazon, has been staging some of their operations for loading, unloading. This is an example of what we see, but also when we look at the planning for considerations for how these vehicles are loading and unloading at the curb, we're thinking about what that means, whether it be providing designated loading, unloading spaces for cargo bike corrals, et cetera. So these are new types of elements that are being folded into the public realm. What happened? I apologize. We're also looking at other ways to support freight deliveries. And our Clean Truck program is another incentive-based program that we've looked at for greening out the freight sector. It's an incentive-based program, it's very successful, implemented back in 2012. We've seen significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and particulate matter, as well as nitrous oxide, and we've replaced over 592 trucks over the past 8 years. So much so that we've also committed to expanding this program to industrial areas citywide, and that was announced this past June. We've also spearheaded our off-hour deliveries program, which works to shift deliveries to the off hours between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. We have targeted participants related to food and non-food retail sectors and vertically integrated chains where it makes the best sense. Our role is particularly to provide technical support and tailored implementation, providing curb access where needed. But there are a series of benefits for the receivers, whether it be having more certainty of when the deliveries will be made. Their goods are prepared when the store opens, and they've also potentially seen a reduced delivery costs as well. Our lessons that we've learned so far from this program is that receivers can lead the change. We really need them to dictate the pace. We have to be proactive about noise management, and also sustained engagement is needed over time for all partners. So I want to leave you with 6 key takeaways. And essentially, when we think about this, we think about, will our habits change in the near future? Whether or not we will choose to go out less or rely increasingly on deliveries out of home, the jury is still out. But disruptions are constant in urban freight, so you have to certainly plan for that. Freight mobility is inextricably linked to the economic prosperity and vibrancy of a region. Whether we design and engineer our cities and built environment, we want to make sure that freight is not an afterthought. Centering the human experience of people's wants, needs, and value help us to center our design and our planning. We must think of all aspects of the supply chain, including the delivery of the employees, the employees that are delivering the goods to your doorstep. Urban freight solutions certainly are not a one-size-fits-all. We need to think about enhanced infrastructure and public-private partnerships, and really thinking about how technology and the role of that in the long-term recovery should be part of our efforts. Integrating freight into land use zoning and urban design and complete streets is essential for thriving cities. And always making sure that you have to pilot test solutions to drive efficiency and create density. So I want to leave you with some links. Once the presentation is available to you all, you can click on these to access more information about the different programs. Now I'm going to hand it over to you, Bruce, all the way in Houston.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to some of us. I'm going to type something into chat. So Professor Race has homework for everybody. In the next 10 seconds, you have to tell us what you've missed besides your mother the last 4 months. Go ahead, I typed in, I miss my Friday Ice House pub evenings, for example. So go ahead, type it in there, 10 seconds. Right, so there's a few A students in there. I'd like to see that. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's the face-to-face stuff. We, you know, in our cities are really place-driven economies. You have to be there. That's what we signed up for. And so they're social and tactile. They have this high density of social and economic networks, and the pandemic has interrupted that. Somebody's typed in travel. Well, me too. I missed bass fishing this summer. So the pandemic has interrupted the graininess of cities. And the solution is going to be local. We're going to have to think about it in those terms looking forward. You know, the aggregate economy, just the general economy, we've dropped almost 30% this year. And that's just part of it. You look at the credit card data now, which is you see in this chart right here. This is what I call the tactile economy. This is the food and service and drinking places. These are places that really provide that social networking opportunity and what we really crave when we live in cities in terms of that social experience. And even museum visits are down almost 60%. That's the part that's changed the most in our cities. And you know, Main Street is tactile. This is where we live, particularly now that most of us are working out of our homes. And so that just that notion about you can't taste this online, you can't meet the owner online, you can't hear this online, and you can't shop like my 90-year-old mother online. You just, you know, this is what we're looking at, and sort of in the pre-pandemic phase, and we've shifted into this new way of experiencing cities where we've lost, you know, that type of interaction. So how are we going to rethink that? Well, part of it, because many of us are working at home, are urban neighborhoods. If you're living in a small town in a growing metro, your Main Street districts, that becomes an extension of our office. It's been an extension of our home. So even as we think about where we live and the kind of choices, there's going to be a high percentage of us that will not be going back to the office. And so we'll be thinking about our neighborhoods different. These are districts that are program managed and promoted. They are incubator districts for the economy, have been historically, and even will be even more so in the future, because they are completely public facing. That means that the supply chain is part of the experience. I love the pictures that Denise was showing in New York. It's just even part of the aesthetic. It's extension of the brand and experience we have in our cities, and that and really the transaction is part of the experience. It's not just waving a card. It's talking to the people at the store or at the restaurant. In many respects, in the 1980s, we talked about cocooning. So at home, we were buying more home products and all that, and that's what you see in the economy now. So home products and furnishings are up, gardening supplies are up, buying homes. The home market is also in pretty good shape. So we're seeing this new phase of that, but it's really extending into our neighborhood districts. As an urban designer, we're placemakers, and so it's space, activity, and path. We think about how we create space, how we activate it, and how we experience it. And in many respects, it's not just a 6-foot grid. You just can't take what we used to do and lay out that 6-foot grid for physical distancing. There's a lot of different ways you can look at cities. There's a natural resiliency built into cities. We have a lot of redundancies and modularities. We've got the socially supportive urban and business systems that make it more resilient. And when we think about all this variety of public space and realm that we have, and Margaret will talk more about this next as well, really becomes this opportunity for really extending commerce, out of the storefront and into the public realm. You have to activate it. So cities are a very high density business network. And so that where you have small and mid-sized businesses or that account for most of our job growth, that them being located in larger metros, that you start to see them really become also part of a more global business hub at the same time. So their growth opportunities are expanded even more. And we have to be the provisioners for that. And then you have to think about how we experience it. So how we move around cities and how we support business and these transactions that are both physical and personal, that is one of the efficiencies that are built in the cities, is that those densities support that kind of resilience. So the solution is going to be local. We've been thinking about how we interact. So there's more bartering, there's a sharing economy, it's more accessible, it's more community-based, and now more digital. And so looking forward, that in the pre-pandemic economy, that was a growing virtual economy, has now been absolutely critical to our success. And so we're going into this new phase. We have to actually support that virtual economy. We have to look at how people have access to it and how we support it, whether you have a child that's going to school or you're trying to do even local business. And that ends up being really important. So this is a phase we need to invest in that, because when we come out of this, the new normal is going to be really this more of a hybrid between that face-to-face and virtual economy. And those successful businesses will be these new businesses that recognize that, and existing businesses that act like new businesses. So there's a bit of a mass customization that we're going to see. So this notion about how local businesses collaborate differently, so you can get something that is specialized, and for you, but using the efficiencies and those relationships to get that. And how we move around. We're a geography of networks. So our mobility systems, our activity spaces, and the modes we're moving are all going to be, really keenly important to how we experience cities and how we move forward into the next new normal. So, I'm looking at the last couple entries to the quiz here. And so somebody misses their annual trip to see grandma. Me too. And so, and as part of that, we are all applying these new tools like we're doing today. And one of the people who's really good at that is Margaret Kidd, who's my colleague at U of H, and she is going to share with her what she's learning and with her own research. Margaret.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, all. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Bruce reminds us place does matter. Just a second. There we go. All right. I mean, place does matter, and there's been an urban shift in response to COVID and how infrastructure is repurposed for distribution, last mile delivery, and point of service. The continuity of business operations at a local scale is the connector to this webinar. So Charles Darwin said, the long history of mankind, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. He also said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And with that, I want to introduce you to really one of the biggest challenges we have in an urban COVID world, and that is the logistics of social services. Pictured here is Bread of Life, which is a provider of groceries and household items in Houston. Pre-COVID, participants arrived at the church, and the point of service delivery was in the format of a church bazaar, and there was collaboration and socialization. With social distancing, a new distribution model had to be created, and they had to turn to the streets for drive-by service. So every Wednesday, approximately 900 families drive by to pick up their allotment for the week. Okay, so cars line up and they go all the way into the central business district. There's also a parking lot underneath the Pierce Elevated that's been repositioned for pallet storage and temporary warehousing. Notable is that volunteers staff the Bread of Life. And for those of you not familiar with the Houston model, volunteering is a huge characteristic of our population. It's also the heart of the resiliency of our region. Now, while the distribution of films has predominantly been through streaming services such as Netflix, Prime, Hulu during COVID, an urban response has been to return to the outdoor cinema. That experience, we had some of those in my age cohort where you would go with the family in a car. So what I've shown here is a picture of Sawyer Yards. It's a former industrial site, which has now been repositioned as a multi-use complex. And they are projecting films on what used to be a grain elevator for Riviana Foods. Okay, we've all read the papers. There's no surprises here. Bankruptcy trends have been enormous in the COVID world. They started this summer. And the fact of the matter is consumers are shopping via e-commerce. So brick and mortar are really struggling. One response from Amazon in both Cleveland and Euclid, Ohio is repositioning abandoned mall space from the likes of, say, JCPenney or Lord & Taylor to distribution center or warehouse facility for last mile delivery. Notable, most malls in America are in dense urban areas near neighborhoods, so they're ideal locations for distribution points. An additional trend we're seeing is a collaboration between Simon Properties, which is the largest mall manager in the country, and Authentic Brands, and they are essentially purchasing bankrupt retailers. I think, you know, if we're going to talk about who's winning the war, e-commerce versus brick and mortar, look no further than Amazon's second quarter earnings of $5.2 billion. That's double their net profit year over year. All right, aligning with best practices as seen in New York City with Rosanna's slides, there are proposals in Houston on the table to take back the streets and sidewalks for restaurant and bar space in Houston's Central Business District. This is a tactical response, and it would eliminate car traffic along Houston's light rail system for a very finite number of blocks. And then it would give these establishments the ability to have agile operations to expand to accommodate more customers and at the same time increase tax revenue collected. Throughout the core of our city, parking lots have been repurposed as distribution points for both restaurants and bars. Additionally, innovative packaging designs have been infused into the local restaurant scene to accommodate takeout orders. Perhaps some of those of you in New York, a margarita or emergency queso to go today from Houston? Okay, there has been changed access and demand patterns as a result of COVID. Rethinking getting the right product at the right price, right quality, right quantity, and right place for the consumer.
Select speakers.
Has been handled really well by H-E-B, a Texas powerhouse grocery brand, which has collaborated with a number of high-end restaurants here in Houston as a distribution point for their pre-cooked high-demand menu items. Additionally, we've even seen restaurants offering a limited list of grocery items for their preferred customers.
Yeah, no, of course not. Basically, in my book.
I think someone needs to close down their speakers, please. Okay, the closing of gyms we've seen across America, and now we have capacity constraints because of social distancing. What we've seen here regionally in Houston is a reconnection of parks with people, not only for exercise, but more saliently for socialization and urban interaction. Major parks in Houston, such as Memorial and Buffalo Bayou Partnership Park, provide a connectivity to residents the same way Central Park does or Battery Park does in New York City. Okay, Houston is moving closer to having an amenity complex comparable to other world cities. Parks and trails are the connective tissue. They wind through the urban core and connect to the Central Business District, ultimately lead to Allen's Landing, where early traders in Houston moved freight and traded cotton. A few miles down the line, you arrive at the Houston Ship Channel and the Turning Basin. Even modern, well-spaced urban places like Houston have seen changes as a result of the pandemic, which have impacted logistics and business operations. Perhaps the largest impact and change will be with personal transportation and mobility, as many corporations, not only locally, but globally, are restructuring the ubiquitous office and moving to a model where employees are working from home. In summary, COVID has redefined public space as a distribution point. It's reminded us of the purposeful resiliency of the built environment, and it's created a need of point of service collaboration between stakeholders. Finally, it's created a need for repurposing hard infrastructure such as malls. I want to thank everyone, and I'm going to turn this over to Andrew for Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you for all of our presenters today. We did have some technical issues there, but we still do have some time to answer questions from our audience. I'll invite the speakers to switch on their videos and be available to answer some of these points. So I think one of the big takeaways for me was, so COVID is an unexpected shock, and that has generated a lot of changes to our urban environment, the ways in which we address it. It's enabled innovation to really come out, and we've seen some great examples of that. But I think also it's accelerated a number of the schemes that we'd already got in line. And I think we saw that with the work that Rosanna was doing. Also Denise mentioned in New York, where it was in play already. Out of hours delivery, looking at cargo bikes, looking at ways to change that. So one question I got just to start off is maybe for you, Denise, COVID hasn't all been bad. It seems to have accelerated some of the positive things that you're wanting to do. Do you see that as you know, a continuing trend and valid in other urban centers as well?
Great question, Andrew. I'd really want to, I guess, start off by thinking about, I think, you know, in many ways, prior to COVID, you know, our connection with freight, I think, was not as crystal clear as it has been during COVID. And that, I think, has been a silver lining. A lot of folks are saying, like, why is my delivery taking like a month to get here? And really, when you think about the supply chain and the folks that helped really move goods in the city, this was a people-centered type of disruption, right? So it had a rippling effects in terms of the people that were working in the distribution facilities or the people that were working in the meat processing plants that certainly were sick and now couldn't process food. So, right, when you think, or meat, I should say. So that has really underscored, I think, a mindset shift in general. But we also saw some silver linings, right? So when a lot more folks were working from home, you also had a little bit more freed up space on the road network. And oftentimes, you know, commercial vehicles and operators were competing for that same space. So they're actually able to meet and make more deliveries. Some of those places were closed, but nonetheless, I think there were some efficiencies in the system. So it's giving us a lot of adjustments in thinking about, oh, really, who are the folks that are creating a lot more of the congestion, and, like, you know, how do we distribute that?
Okay, well, thank you for that. And we've started to get quite a lot of questions through. I'll just say the ones we don't get to, we will address these and provide a video response and attach that to the end of this presentation. So even if we don't get it during this slot, we will address all of your questions. So a question we've got from Sri Devi is, if retail is becoming more and more hybrid, with more importance to e-commerce, how can we still activate space with street front retail in this post-pandemic world? And maybe we can have a Houston view on that to start off with. So Margaret or Bruce, if you'd like to comment on that.
I think that's a great question, and I could actually tie that to another experience that we have here. Houston has created a model. It's an incubator for new restaurants where maybe 10 different venues will be housed in one place with a central seating area. And that same, and they may stay for 6 months or a year and get their feet on the ground, and then they move to permanent space. That same concept of almost like a pop-up shop could create that connectivity for retail.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And I must say, Denise, you're getting a lot of questions coming through here. But I, you know, specifically about some of the interesting things you've got. So I repeat again, you'll be able to see some of the links to the material that Denise had from her slides. So one question we have from John Coleman, a colleague of mine in CILTNA. So pre-pandemic, the planning assumptions were that transportation infrastructure and systems were struggling, particularly in an urban environment. And I think, Rosanna, you know, from a planning perspective, how do you see the new world being? Is this going to be more of the same? Is there changes that you're seeing around our constraints around infrastructure? You're still on mute.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Through our work with the Smart Truck Management Plan, we got a really clear picture of, you know, with the population growth in New York, so were the commodity growing as well, and pretty significantly with pretty limited capacity in our streets. In fact, our streets in a way are shifting as they balance to support different users. And so already that throughput wasn't necessarily the same. And so what happens when we work with our clients, because we look at the public realm and we look at the streets and the infrastructure and know that there's not enough space. And so looking at things like consolidation or virtual consolidation, where we ask them, maybe they can consolidate things with one shipper, or start to look at interesting ways of taking one particular commodity, such as office supplies, and within one building or within one district, start to look at how they can coordinate and perhaps start to use the same company and consequently reduce the truck trips. And so even though we're not expecting to see this e-commerce demand go away, I think, Denise mentioned, it really goes back to the receiver and the people who are creating that demand to be conscientious of, what they're effectively asking the system to do. And I think, the roles of buildings with lots of occupants and bids, or a developer looking at, creating an extra density, that there are lots of opportunities to think about logistics more holistically than just, okay, the number of trucks coming in and out, how can that be better managed thoughtfully, ahead in the planning process?
Okay, no, thank you for that. And I think a linked question to that, we probably just have time to cover as well, is around the change of modes. So fascinatingly, we've seen the use of bikes replacing what is essentially diesel or gas-powered vehicles. The railway as well, or the railroad, should also offer an opportunity here to remove congested modes and serving the city. Now, in New York, most people don't see rail, but I think there is a rail presence actually. And are you seeing any changes to that, Denise?
So rail, I think, covers about 2% of the freight that moves into the city. Our sister agency, New York City Economic Development Corporation, has been working to invest in expanding the rail option. I think it's obviously not as nimble as like providing something to the last mile, like either by a truck or a cargo bike, but certainly there are opportunities for transloading, and where that makes sense. I think it's just really a matter of investing in that infrastructure, and it takes a longer time to kind of get that up and running.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time now on the webinar, but as I said, we will address all of the questions that we haven't got to today, and we'll include those as part of the recording that we provide at the end. So I'd just like to spend the last few seconds to thank all of today's speakers, and also to our sponsors today, AAR. I'd also like to thank all of you that have attended. I really appreciate everybody is busy and you've taken time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar today. I hope you have found it interesting and of value. Your feedback is going to be very important to us, and we're going to be sending everybody a short survey. If you could please respond to that, that will help us plan our future events, both in this series and also other CILTNA webinars that we run. Our contact details are now showing on the screen, so please follow up with any of us if you have any further questions or comments. You can connect with CILT North America via social media, and you can see the links there. And if you're interested in joining CILT, please look on our website or just get in touch with me. I run the chapter in the US. Finally, I'd just like to remind everyone that the next webinar in this Urban Futures series is going to be advertised shortly, and we'll be emailing details of that to you, as well as posting it on our website and social media pages. The recording of this event is going to be available on our website. We'll also put it on our YouTube channel. So we encourage you to share it with colleagues that have not been able to make it today. So thank you all and have a great day.